So hello, everybody. Welcome to this conversation that I'm going to be having today with Jeff. And my name is Rina Lang. I'm one of the co-founders of a coaching community, and Jeff and I, we've known each other for a while. And when I first met Jeff, he introduced me to something that I've never heard of, and I didn't even know it existed. And so today we got together to actually talk to you about that and give Jeff a chance to introduce himself, talk about the new interesting things that he's bringing out in the next couple of weeks, months. And there's a lot of exciting things happening on your end, Jeff. So why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us what is it that you do and what is it that you're really passionate about? Because that's what we're here to talk about your unique passion that I've never, ever heard before about.
Thank you, Rina. I'm Jeff Kay, and I'm the founder of company called My Digital Memories and the podcast Before 1950 Memory Lane. And I got started on my journey back when I was 7, when my grandmother passed away at my feet. So I started my legacies very, very early. And that included saving birthday cards, and it evolved, and holiday cards, and it evolved into other media. And I'm sure many of you have the same story or very similar stories. From there, I realized that my legacy, that all that was very temporary. Cards and everything degrade and things like that. And so I started to go with technology and switch it to VHS tapes, slides, and things like that. But they also degrade. So I constantly look for or keep up to date with medium to keep things preserved for as long as possible. But then I realized everything is very inspirational. People's memories are very precious. Hence, you got the launch of 23andMe, Ancestry, and things like that I'm sure many of you participate in. But with that being the case, everybody has stories to tell, very inspirational stories to tell. And so that's when I decided to start a podcast Before 1950 Memory Lane, to give people the opportunity to share those inspirational stories of when their family immigrated here, for example, and maybe they started their own business, which thrived, and maybe it's now a small family business that's been around for a couple of 100 years, or maybe there's stories from World War II, or maybe there's other stories that people would love to share. Serena, that's how I got involved in it. I can't hear you.
It's incredible how much of the history gets forgotten. And I definitely follow those YouTube videos from Ancestry, I think, where they take celebrities and they go and research their background. And it's always surprising. There are so many surprises that come up. And it's incredible how much of the family history gets forgotten or gets lost along the way. But somehow, somewhere in the archives, in the old photos, there is that story to be told. And just yesterday, I was reading this quote in a book, one of the books that's here. And I was thinking of you, Jeff, because this quote really resonated with me. And I thought I'll mention this today during our podcast. It was saying, what children want to forget, grandchildren want to remember. And I really felt it's so accurate, because as we're going through our life stories, things happen to us. Often children are the ones who maybe are not as interested in the story of the grandparent or of the parents, but we're definitely very, very interested in the stories of our grandparents, because there is just so much change happening in the world that, those two generations apart, it's like completely different world that it's hard for us to even imagine how it must have been. But we are standing on the shoulders of those giants, of our ancestors that brought us to new places, that brought us to a new country, or to new experiences, to new financial possibilities. And so what did they have to go through is often forgotten. So, and that's, I think, what you're trying to do. But specifically, you are a reminiscence therapy consultant. So
correct.
what's that? Tell us more about reminiscence therapy and where do you come in as a consultant?
Well, what reminiscent therapy is, it's for dementia patients, Alzheimer patients, or people struggling with memory issues. And it was developed in the 1990s. And what it is, it's when you take pictures and videos, slides and film, and you put it towards their favorite song or their favorite music. And it helps them improve their cognitive skills as well as their emotional well-being. And it works even better if you're working with a trained psychologist. By no means am I a doctor or anything, nor do I claim to be. But yes, so I do work with fit families to help put all that together.
It reminds me, it reminds me of that study that they did a few years ago, where they put a group of elderly into an environment that looks into an apartment that looked exactly in the same way, which was the in vogue when they were young. And they told those people to pretend as if they were 25 again. And so the surprising result of that study was that people actually were much more healthier, much more energized, much more happier. This pretending of being 25 again and being in that environment, physical environment that they remember from the time from when they were young, really helped them somehow psychologically, emotionally, physically to connect with those times again and feel young again. So it kind of like reminds me a little bit of what you're trying to do. Of course, you're not putting them in an environment, but you're connecting them to a time when they were
Yes,
young. Excellent. Excellent.
exactly. And one of the things, I mean, a lot of people now, they take their, with the help of technology, they take their phones and they take all these pictures and they work with their their grandparents who might suffer from this condition. And that's an awesome thing. But usually people with memory disorders remember the past that more than the present. So I take all their old photographs, improve them, restore them other ways, and giving the opportunity, the family can then put them in a digital frame. So it's something that can always be with them and that they can look at constantly.
So people that choose to work with you, how is the process usually like? Do you get together with them? You choose the pictures? How long is the process? What's the end result that they can expect, and how fast?
Well, what we normally do is we have a Zoom call, and I get their requirements, a rough idea of how many videos or pictures and things that we're talking about. In all honesty, I've yet to come across anybody who knows exactly how much stuff they have. They just have no idea. And matter of fact, I don't have any idea how much stuff that I have. Um, so we get an idea, rough estimate of how much stuff they have. Then what they want to do with it. Do you want it? Obviously, they want it digitized, but what format would you like it on? Would you like it on USB? Would you like it on a DVD? Would you like it in the cloud? Would you like me to just put it on a link and you can just share it with your family and friends? All these are various options. Although I'm working to steer people away from DVDs, as it's kind of going the way of VHS tapes, which are slowly dying. And then, so after I get an understanding as to what they want, I'll send them a proposal, which is what we discussed and what we went over to make sure we're both on the same page. And then I give them instructions on how to send their stuff to me, as I run a nationwide service, if not global. And that's usually via UPS with a tracking number. They'll pay for shipping to me, and I'll pay for the shipping back. And yes, they will get their originals back. Then after that's done, the process begins. I'll notify them that yes, I've received it, of course. But then the process begins. How long does it take? That's more of a trickier question, as it kind of depends upon how much stuff I'm being sent. If it's slides, for example, I can do about 1,800 slides a day. Pictures and other items take a little longer. Currently, I have someone who is sending me 10,000 slides. So that's going to take quite a while. I'm working with him right now to figure out what actually he wants to digitize, because those people, I mean, you can't digitize everything. So if you have scenery, pictures of scenery that really doesn't relate to you, you can take that out. If you've got pictures of people that you don't know who they are and you don't know the context of it, you can take that out. So there are ways to cut back on the quantity of stuff that you actually want to digitize, because obviously the only thing you want to keep is the stuff that's important to you, stuff that you can relate to, something, the meaningful things that bring you joy, or those special events, and that help reconnect you with your family members who have passed on, or things like that.
Excellent. So I know you're a big lover of stories. That's what you're
Yes.
trying to do. You're trying to tell a story.
Yes.
You will remind basically the person, the loved one, that this is being done for, of their story, so that they keep on connecting with it and keep on remembering. And I know that because you have such a love of stories, you've launched your podcast, which is the Before 1950s Memory Lane. I love the name of that podcast. And you also have a Facebook group with the same name. So tell us more about your podcast. What motivated you to call the podcast Before 1950s? Because why not before 1960s or 1970s? So tell us a bit more about that. And what stories are you trying to tell in the podcast?
Before 1950, I was thinking, one, a lot of the people that I get are the kids of people whose parents were in World War II. And the stories they have are just incredible. They're incredible, they're inspirational. And yes, I could have picked something from 1960 or 70s and done from there. But so many things happened in the 50s, well, and the 60s and 70s, obviously, but the clothing, the development, and you've got the Depression, and how people survived that, World War I, World War II. And so I wanted to get to the children whose parents have been in that era, and how they got through it. And so that was my inspiration. So Before 1950 Memory Lane is about those stories. It's about people, how they coped, how they survived, how they what inspiration led them and what struggles that they had and how they overcame it. And those are the topics that I'm looking for. And that's what I'm hoping to inspire other people.
Excellent. And so for those of you who are listening to the replay, if you have a story that is set sometime before 1950, do reach out to Jeff and tell him his story. He's got now a podcast. I think you're going live once a week. Is that true?
That's the goal, yes. And before 1950, it could also be something in the, depending if you've done your genealogy, it could be 100, it could be 1850. It could be anything that actually transformed your family. So
exactly. So yeah, I know you shared with me before as well about your podcast. And what I love about the podcast is that the stories are inspirational. So what happened in your family that affected maybe the generations to come? In what way? How is your family different now? What are the stories that are being told in your family that are so inspirational that they are marking the next generation still? And it could be anything, because we've been the good guy and the bad guy. It doesn't have to be, oh, my family hails from the kings of and queens of England. I mean, it could be that story, but also don't forget the small stories. I know, Jeff, you also have a story that you began telling me, but I told you, no, don't tell me. I want to hear it first during the podcast. So what's your family story?
my family story is, after my parents died, I found a picture in my grandfather's wallet. It was about the size of a postage stamp. And I'm like, who is this woman? And I contacted my living relatives, of course, and I did some work on Ancestry, only to find out she was my great grandmother, which went back to about 1870. So I decided to do some digging on Ancestry, and my sister was like, "No, don't go there." I'm like, "Why?" And she's like, "I don't know how many illegitimate relatives we have." And I'm like, "I won't tell you." So, and there weren't any. But I did find out that my a brother of, when going back to about 1850, was arrested for white slavery, and he was incarcerated for a year in Georgia. And this is going back to about 19, or somewhere into the late 1800s and 1900s. I'm like, what is white slavery? And here I thought our family was, you know, just normal every day. And I'm finding out all this stuff about, oh, well, this went on. And no, like, yes, he was a kind of a black sheep. Wonder how many other black sheeps that we have.
You should probably branch out to Australia.
Yeah. And, but the other thing I did find out is everybody on both sides of my family were entrepreneurs. No one ever worked for anybody else. So it's no wonder I didn't fit into the corporate world.
So what is white slavery? That's also quite a business.
To tell you the truth, I didn't look it up. I don't want to know.
That's hilarious. That's definitely a story worth telling. I would probably look up. I don't know. There must be some register of former criminals that you could look up.
Oh, I'm sure there is, and I'll have to check it out. That's the next step.
So maybe that could be the next business, investigator, private family
Yeah.
investigator.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, excellent. So I love it. So if you have a story that you want to tell, you want to share, reach out to Jeff, and I'm sure he's going to be able to schedule you. And I look forward to all the stories that people are going to be sharing with you. And so, yeah, you also have a Facebook group, I gather. And in that
Yes.
Facebook group, so what are you trying to do with that Facebook group?
What I'm trying to do with that Facebook group is to get people to obviously join my podcast, but I want them to share those stories. Don't just fill out the form to be on the podcast. I'm looking for people to interact, to build and develop a community where everybody can share their stories, and we can all learn and grow. And because all of these stories, these inspirational stories, these aren't stories that people are going to read about in history books. They won't be there. That's why the podcast, the Facebook group is so important, to capture those stories and to remember those loved ones.
Yes, and just also people, I think, should also think about the next generations that are going to come, right? The grandchildren and the grandchildren and so on. And I keep on mentioning this book that I read. And unfortunately only exists in German. And it's those stories about war children and war grandchildren. So it was written by a psychiatrist. And now there's so much talk about epigenetics. And what they realized, for instance, for war children, these are the children who were babies or small children during the war. And of course, they had all kinds of psychological traumas that nobody paid attention to because they were still children. And there wasn't so much awareness about that. But then the same woman wrote another book about war grandchildren. And what was happening with the grandchildren, with the generation that came after, they were exhibiting symptoms that it wasn't something that they've lived through, but through epigenetics, they inherited certain traumas, certain fears, certain diseases. And they were able to track it back to the generations that lived through the war, which means through epigenetics, the next generations are also affected. And so by recovering the stories, I also believe that we're preserving a piece of history, because you never know how those traumas or experiences are going to turn out, in what variation they're going to turn up with the next generations. And so giving them that opportunity to actually learn and know and see what might have happened to their grandparents and grandparents that might be still affecting them. And so I think that's also very important.
It is.
And I think,
I'm sorry, please continue.
No, I was going to say that the work that you do is really incredible, because if I think about, I still have my two grandmothers left, but my grandfathers are already gone. And I wished I had a chance to talk to them more about the stories and the war and whatever they lived through. And now they're gone, because, yeah, they often didn't want to talk about it, but often we also didn't ask.
True.
Yes. And so,
sorry, I was thinking about, it was something I was thinking about several days ago. When people are born, obviously your parents are already here, but how many people actually investigate their parents and what their life was like beforehand? I mean, I was born when my mom was 19, but what happened during those 19 years? And
well, now you can see it on Facebook and Instagram.
oh yeah, but the funny part is I bumped into somebody on Facebook who actually grew up with my mom and
really?
dad, and is able to fill in these gaps and where they met and how they met and things like that. So it's been incredible.
Yeah, I have my diaries since I was 12. So I'm sure if I ever have children, they'll be able to read about me and know what I've been up to. Okay, so perhaps one of my last questions is, and I love asking this question, anybody I interview, anybody I talk to, the myths you want to debunk. I know there are lots of myths around this whole issue. Can this really help somebody who's fighting dementia or some sort of mental deterioration? Or is this really useful? Is this really gonna be helpful to my family in any way? So what are some of the myths you come across? What are some of the things people ask you and that you want to debunk? Some of the myths you want to debunk.
Some of the myths are, well, if they can't remember things now, how do you expect them to remember things back then? But the two of them are very different. Back then, history, from what I've read and what I've seen in the groups that I'm part of, and I'm still learning, but there has been significant research that has proven this does help. And it may not be for the long run. It may not help their memory for the long run, but for a brief while, they will remember those events that are shown. And maybe when you're visiting your parents, your grandparents, or people that are unfortunately suffering from this horrible, I'll say, disease, it's very painful. It's painful it's more, in my opinion, it's more painful for the family than it is the patient. Because I couldn't imagine my mother or dad not knowing me. It's terrible. And going back in time, maybe it'll help them for a brief moment remember who they are, where they come from. And it's important. And while it may not work for everybody, I think anything is worth a try. Obviously, since this has been going on since the 1990s, it has helped. There's proof that it has helped. There's research that it has helped. So, and preserving those memories for your future generation is also inspirational.
Yes. And as the family spreads out, you cannot, you just have one picture.
Right.
It's hard to then divide. So it's good to have the digital file as well that could be then distributed along the family members as the family grows.
Oh, absolutely.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
So for those who would like to get in touch with you, how can people connect with you? Where can they find you?
They can find me. My website is mydigital-memories.com. My email is jeff@mydigital-memories.com. Or I love it when you just call me, 703-861-2793.
Excellent. And do also check out Jeff's YouTube channel, Jeff's Facebook group. I'm sure you can find it all on that website. And reach out to him if there's anything you need from him. And watch out for all the new episodes coming out on his channel.
There will be many.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I enjoyed this conversation, and thank you so much for sharing more about the good work that you do and the things you're passionate about. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening in, and that's it. See you next time.
See ya.